Hi there. In this video, I'll be revisiting the subject of the acceptable types of ID cards that Alabama notaries are able to accept when notarizing signatures for the general public. And yes, it's time for an update. To be honest, I probably should have provided this update much sooner, but I only recently learned about some new information that I'll be sharing with you in this video. Last week, I posted a video here on the Notaries for Alabama YouTube channel called Credible Witnesses. If you haven't watched it yet, take a look at it. Think it still has some helpful information for notaries. In that state, I talk about how about half of the states here in the US give their notaries permission to use credible witnesses if the signer does not have a driver's license or passport or the traditional forms of ID. I also inform Alabama notaries in that video that unfortunately the state of Alabama does not give us that option. So we can't use credible witnesses. However, our elected officials did give us a plan B, and that's what I want to talk about today. So let's go ahead and get started. As a notary that's been active, commissioned, notarizing signatures on a regular basis, I've been telling people no if they haven't been able to produce the license, the passport, the state ID, and a few other documents. I hated doing it, but I felt as if current Alabama law and our handbook really didn't give us too many clear options. On the other hand, our handbooks and laws, they don't say we can only accept a license or only accept a passport. They've been somewhat vague. And the good news about that, it does allow us to consider other options, which is good. What I've paid attention to and how I train notaries is that our laws, notary laws state that ideally the type of signature we should accept should have a photograph of the signer, a sample signature of the signer, their description, which includes date of birth, height, weight, that sort of things. But again, it just never, and it also gives some examples. It does mention an example would be a license, a passport, but again, it leaves room for interpretation. And that has worked for most of us over the years, especially those of you, excuse me, who know your notary laws, those of you who are experienced, meaning you're not just brand new commission, you've done a number of notarizations, and so you're more comfortable working within those guidelines. And I think that is still good advice for each of us to follow. Now, whether you are a mobile notary who performs only general notary work or a notary signing agent, it's important that you ask the question about what type of ID will be presented even before you get to the signing table. You're going to ask what type of form needs to be notarized, and then your next question should be what type of ID that you have. Because when you are making exceptions to identification cards, you really need to have that ironed out and discuss with the signer before you arrive. So, what's new? What's the new information? The new information is that I came across an Alabama Attorney General opinion about a week ago, and it's dated 1998. And I know for some of you young notaries, that sounds like a long time ago. But in this Attorney General opinion, um, the Attorney General was asked what notaries can do when a signer lacks the usual ID. And I'll link that opinion in the description for those of you who want to take a look at it. It is Attorney General Opinion 98-00116. The topic is Notary Public Identification Cards and Signatures. Now, in case you don't know, an Attorney General opinion is a legal interpretation of existing law. It's a response to a question that was asked by a state official or a state agency who was unclear about a state law. And because of this, I trust an attorney general opinion. So give me a moment. I'm going to pull up AGO 98-116 for you to take a look at with me. So here's the attorney general opinion on the screen. And I'm going to scroll down. By the way, this opinion also talks about how to handle when a signer is unable to make their normal signature. And I'll cover that in a different video. All right. And so I'm going to start here. Photo identification is preferable to identify a person whose signature a notary is to attest. If photo identification is not available, another form of adequate identification should be required for the notary to satisfy himself of the identity of the person. All right, I don't want to make you dizzy, but I'm going to scroll down to the middle. Good. All right, these are the questions. Number two, again, number one deals with signing an X. But number two, if an individual has no driver's license, either because he or she cannot read or write, or because he or she is physically unable to drive, does a notary need picture identification before attesting to the individual signature? And that's kind of interesting. I kind of skipped over that before. They're adding conditions, but we know that there are other reasons why someone may not have a license. So the Attorney General reminds us we can use personal knowledge of the signer. That's always an option for us. We're also reminded that we have the duty to use ordinary reasonable care in performing our notarizations. That's really important. And reasonable care means doing what we're doing right now is one example. All right, that's a little too big. So for me, here we go. Thank you for your patience. All right, slide down. If the person whose signature the notary is to attest, give me one moment. If not known to the notary, he should require whatever form of identification is adequate for him to reasonably ascertain the identification of that person. I'm so glad they put reasonably. Again, they're not asking us to mind read or be ID experts. Photo identification is certainly preferable, but if it is not available, other sources of identification may be used. Acceptable sources of identification may include the birth certificate, social security cards, food stamp cards, marriage certificates, Medicaid, Medicare, or welfare identification, or any form of governmentally issued identification. In conclusion, photo ID is preferable to identify a person whose signature a notary is to attest. If photo ID is not available, another form of adequate ID should be required for the notary to satisfy himself of the identity of the person. There you go. So I need to be a little more flexible on the types of ID that I can accept. And if you're like me, when I first saw this, I was like, wow, that's pretty generous. But I think we're at a point now where it makes sense. It, again, in light of some of the natural disasters that have been taking place where people have lost everything, in light of the fact when individuals have a medical emergency or rush to the hospital, sometimes medivac to a larger hospital in another city or state, they may not have their identification available. So again, I consider this um, a good thing. And what's also good, and I'll talk more about it in just a moment, is that each notary is responsible for deciding which ID he or she is comfortable accepting. I want to pull up one more visual for you, and then we will wrap this up. So after reading that, I really had to sit with it for a little bit and decide how I'm going to incorporate this new information into my notarization routine and my notary bag, so to speak. And I felt I needed a visual. I learn better with the visual. And so going forward, I'll also be incorporating this in my training classes. Some of you who are watching have already gone through Notary Basics, training for Alabama's Notaries. If you're a subscriber to my channel, you'll see there is a series, a free training series called Just the Basics, which does a high level overview of the steps notaries should take. Alabama notaries that went out notarizing signatures. So I'm going to need to add this new information to those training courses. But in the meantime, I'm going to print this out and add it to my notary bag. And so there are different levels of ID that we can accept. I've put them in different tiers, 5 different levels. Tier 1 would be the most preferred type of ID, and it's what I've been going by thus far. Preferably, we want the signer to show us ID that has their photograph, their physical description, and their signature. Okay. Most common ID cards that have all 3 of those things is an Alabama driver's license, a state ID, also known as a non-driver ID card, and a U.S. passport. So even in light of this new information, Tier 1 is the ideal preferred method for us to identify signers. When that's not available, and we're finding that to be true more and more as more people move to the state of Alabama, we should be open to accepting Tier 2 identification, which would be a driver's license from one of the other 50 states or a non-driver state ID from Minnesota, Colorado, Texas without any problem. Um, those IDs also include a photograph, physical description, and a signature. Now, I say without any problem, it's no problem for me because I have invested in these ID checking guides. I have one that gives me examples of what IDs look like from all 50 states and US territories. That includes Puerto Rico for one, and Canada. The other one includes international IDs from other countries. This is very helpful because, again, we have people coming to Alabama from all over the world. So, with those items, or you can also Google the most recent ID for these countries and for other states. But I enjoy having paper available, but feel free to Google. So that takes care of tiers 1 and 2. Tier 3, you can consider accepting a U.S. passport card that is different from a U.S. passport, a permanent resident ID card, U.S. military ID card, Alabama voter, not photo, Alabama voter ID card, and an Alabama pistol permit. I'm not going to bring up examples of those. I was going to, but I'll link a URL where you can get a look at those. If you're a resident of Alabama, you know how strict Alabama's voter ID requirements are. It's one of the strictest in the nation. And so while it does not have a signature, it does have the individual's photograph, uh, physical description, and some other information. I know pistol permits, we don't see them as much, but again, they've got a current photo and a limited description. Finally, going to tier 4. And already, even before this new information, I was in certain situation accepting tier 3 ID. And I think I may have accepted tier 4 once. But tier 4 ID would be employee ID from federal or state government, employee ID from the county, a municipality, or board, and then student ID or employee ID from a public private college. I need to pause here for a moment. I'm getting this information from the Alabama Secretary of State website because Tier 4 ID is allowed to be used when Alabama residents go to vote if they don't have a Tier 1 ID or a Tier 2 ID. And so I feel based on this new understanding that we have from the Attorney General opinion that Tier 4, it's ID issued by a government, federal government or state government. And so I'm going to expand my horizons. Also, I've been asked numerous times, Michelle, what if it's a minor that needs their signature notarized? And I've been hard stop. No, I need state ID or passport or something. But now I know that in some situations it may be okay for me to accept a Alabama high school or college ID. And then finally, tier 5. And again, I've got some more work to do on tier 5. Why do I say that? One, I don't feel as if we should just defer to tier 5 automatically. Meaning, if someone says, hey, I want you to know, hey, I need my signature notarized on this letter. And if I say, well, what type of ID do you have? And they say, oh, I've got my birth certificate. I'm like, no, let's start at the beginning. Do you have a driver's license, a state ID, a US passport? And then work up to tier 5 if only it is necessary. You follow me? Tier 5, and when I retype this, I'm going to put the words optional, last resort, okay, not first option. Um, it should be the exception and not the norm. All right, you'll see birth certificate and marriage certificate as being listed. These need to be certified and certified by an official at the vital statistic office or the probate office. I'm not talking about certified by a notary public because in Alabama and in most every other state, notaries should not be doing copy certifications of vital statistic records or documents. And then what if the signer wasn't married in Alabama or born in Alabama? Do you know what a New Hampshire birth certificate should look like? I don't. Do you? I don't know I know what an Alabama marriage certificate looks like, the newer ones, but I don't know what the older ones look like. And so again, that's why I want you to be careful when accepting Tier 5 documents. You're going to want to get on Google because it's not going to be in the ID checking guidebook. You're going to need to do some research on those. Social Security card. The format of a Social Security card has changed over the years. I still have my original Social Security card from when I started working when I was 15, I think, or 16. My signature on that card looks very different from the signature that I make now. And my parents' Social Security card looks very different from my Social Security card. So again, you're going to need to get online and go on the Social Security. If you're going to accept a Social Security card, get online, go to the Social Security Administration, and take a look at the sample. Hopefully, they have a visual of what that card should look like. What security features, front and back, should it have? Also listed on here is a food stamp card, Medicaid card. Unfortunately, I don't know what those two items look like. If you do and you're a notary, great. I'm going to need to do some research. Same thing with the welfare card. I'm not going to know what that looks like, but I do have an idea of what the Medicare card looks like based on what my parents had, also based on when I worked at a healthcare facility and would help admit patients to worked in the admissions area. And so they produced that Medicare card as part one of their types of health insurance. I also know what the requirements are for someone to be eligible for Medicare. So that helps me uh, gauge whether this card is reasonable to be used as ID at that time. So again, you're going to need to, for Tier 5, you're going to need to get on the internet. You may need to make some phone calls, ask questions, and I also encourage you to go ahead and make sure that you make a special journal entry that explains why you used a Tier 5, why you used a birth certificate to ID the signer instead of a Tier 1. All right. Signer said their home was burnt down at this address, everything was lost. All they had was their food stamp card or whatever the reason is, but take very good notes when doing this. Let's see if I can change the slide. I can. So just real quick, this is the last slide that I want to cover with you. The ideal identification card will have an issue and an expiration date. That is very important because, again, if you are using this or something similar or Google, you will know that ID cards issued during a certain span of time has unique security features. And so a card that was issued in 2025 is going to be a little different from what has an issue date of 2020. And yes, I'm checking all of that at the signing table. Again, these are for This information is for in-person notarizations only. I am not talking about Alabama remote notarizations. So again, I'm talking about the ideal card. We already know that tier 5 is not ideal. Um, Second bullet, ideally, the ID card should be active, meaning not expired. But if it is expired, it should not be expired more than 60 days. Where am I getting that from? That is a practice that the representatives at the voting poll stations use for voters. So I feel that is a safe window of time that I can use for notarizations. ID cards issued by the U.S. federal or state entity can be used, and that includes Puerto Rico. Unfortunately, some people are not aware that Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, and so you should not be treating Puerto Rico ID as you would ID from China. Okay? Um, that should be more acceptable from Puerto Rico. Make sure ideally the ID has a clear photograph of the signer, and that photograph looks like the person appearing before you. Ideally, it has a signature, the signer's date of birth, their height, their weight, their eye and health color. The last few things I want to say about the different tiers that we covered. Um, Tier 1, I'm starting that off at the bottom. Because that's the one I hope you will use the most. That's what we should see the most of. We like it because it has the signer signature, and I cover this in my training courses. Yes, you are taking the ID card, placing it next to the signature that is made in your journal, and doing a comparison. If they don't look similar, that's a yellow flag. It also is a signature that most Alabama notaries should be familiar with. Tier 2 ID cards also have the signature of the signer, and the ID can easily be identified by you purchasing an ID checking guidebook or going on to Google or using another source. Tier 3 ID, a little more restrictive, but those ID cards do include a physical description of the signer and is less apt to be duplicated by imposters or fraudsters. It's going to be, due to their security features, a little harder to duplicate. And then finally, on this exhibit is Tier 4. It gives us notaries the opportunity to accept ID cards for minors who typically won't have a driver's license or state ID, and also the elderly who may have given up their driver's license or only have an expired ID expired for years. So that driver's license that expired 10 years ago or 5 years ago, plus a Medicare card would probably be satisfactory for me. Notice I didn't include tier 5 on the diagram. That was on purpose because, again, that's the exception, not the rule type of ID. I hope these visuals are helpful. I'm going to see if I can go back real quick, give you another opportunity to hit pause and make a note or do a screenshot of this. And I'd love to hear your comments below about your thoughts. Are you going to just stick with tier one and tier two, and why? Are you going to venture to tiers three, four, and five? I really would like to get your feedback on that. Knowing how to handle ID card discrepancies or the lack of before getting to the signing table makes all the difference in the world. So if you're not doing it now, I want to encourage you to start doing it. Add that to the questions that you ask the signer before you accept the appointment. And I'm speaking to you whether you're a mobile notary or a notary signing agent, because typically the signing agent instructions tell you to do that, to verify with the signer the types of ID that they have available and to take copies of those IDs. I do not recommend, it is not our responsibility to make photocopies of identification cards when performing regular or general notary work. I mentioned earlier, I want to stress it is important for you to verify the signature of the signer. If they're presenting you with ID with signatures, you're going to compare what's on the ID card to what they leave for you in the journal. You're going to make sure you may mention in the journal the type of ID that the signer showed you. It doesn't matter if it's tier one, two, three, four, five. Record it. And then if you are using tiers four or five, explain why you are using that type of ID. Take at least 15 seconds to study the ID card. You're looking at the front, you're looking at the back, you're holding it up to the signer to make sure that you have no concerns about the signer's identity. By taking these additional steps, you will instill, one, you will appear to be more knowledgeable, confident. That will reassure the signer that you know what you are doing. That will give them more confidence in you. That will encourage them to cooperate with your requests. And if you explain it well, they will have no problem cooperating with you. You will be prepared by having tools available in your notary bag to do what you need to do. And this all sets you apart from other mobile notaries, office notaries, and notary signing agents. So, yeah, I'm talking about, are you a freshman notary or are you a grad student notary? And those of you who have plans to run a notary business, if it's your business, you need to demonstrate a higher level of accuracy, knowledge, ability than someone who is not. Thank you for watching. That's it for now. If you have not yet subscribed to the channel, I'm asking you to do so now. I'm sure you have places to go, people to see, things to do, and signatures to notarize. So with that, I'll say so long. Thank you.